I'm Fatheree.
This is Dave.
And this is Tex-Trek. So welcome to the 46th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast. We're glad to have you back aboard the Starship Texas. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite Star Trek show, Deep Space Nine.
It's increasingly people's favorites. I think we talked about this before, probably a little bit when we talked about the first episodes. But it's... I think, you're more often going to hear, TOS and Next Generation? But I bet it's a solid third place.
It's weird to me because when I grew up, I felt like I was and I wasn't around many people who watched Star Trek.
Right.
So...
But your layman's view was that it was not loved?
Yeah, like whenever I talk about Deep Space Nine, people will be like, oh, shut up, you stupid kid.
Is it why do you think that was? Do you think that was their genuine impression, or do you think it was just like people were getting a little burned out on Trek and they were just like, oh, this kid just likes the latest hot shit?
No, I don't know. Just people seem to gravitate more towards the original series and the Next Generation. But what surprised me was to learn, recent years, how popular Deep Space Nine has become. Mm-hmm. And I would say it's actually... It can contend for possibly the most popular show with original series and Next Generation. At least amongst the more dedicated, with more casual fans who don't watch the shows religiously like I do.
Right. Then they're going to gravitate to the two iconics, I guess.
And that's certainly where the merchandise sales would indicate those are the most popular. The two big money makers are Next Gen and the original series. And
I think those ones also most kind of embody Star Trek's kind of the trope and structure that we think of, that usually comes to mind with Star Trek of exploration, find a problem in an episode, resolve it, fly somewhere else. And Deep Space Nine was sedentary comparatively. Like, they still had an adventure of the week, but they weren't out flying around too often, and the vibe was more serious, more political. It had a set theme to it, which was actually let's. Do we get around to the overall thing of what we're going to be doing today?
Sure. This is the 25th anniversary of the show, and specifically the first season of the show, premiered back in 1993.
But we're going to be looking at the first season from the perspective of you, the veteran, and me, the rookie, who has just now watched season 1 for the first time in my entire life. I believe my net experience with it before was probably 2 or 3 episodes that I watched in the 90s, and then I was like, well, back to Babylon 5. That's where the real action is. But that was 1993, Dave. What does 2018 Dave think? I don't know.
Well, we've talked about the pilot already.
Yep.
So we watched that a year ago, and if you want to see our thoughts in that, I'll have a link to it in the comments or in the description. But as far as the other episodes go, just let me ask you, what was your impression of Deep Space Nine before you continued past the pilot?
I think my impression was that, my bias against Next Generation in the 90s, which was still going on.
Which you've outgrown, you should say that.
I've outgrown it. And since found a huge newfound fondness for it. Was that it still had a certain bit of that stuffiness that I associated with it. But what I did not know was just how political it was. That they would... and how rich the characters were. So initially, I remember watching the original first episode, or first 2 episodes, and finding the characters a little bit flat for my taste. And then when we revisited them, I was like, you know what? I actually kind of like everybody out of the gate here. And in a way, I did give it a chance to prove itself, But through newer eyes, I really liked that first episode, or first 2 episodes, and I don't think I even had a real sense of what went on. They still have what I would call of that episode of the week structure. It has not gotten into the heavy continuity in season 1 at that point. But as I was kind of going through it, the number of episodes that reference the occupation of Bajor, conflict with the Cardassians, it's like, I feel like at least half of them.
Yeah, like that's built into the setting of the show. That's built into the permanent setting of the show.
Yeah. And I don't think I appreciated how cool that was going to be, and how it would in some ways feel like Star Trek, which has often had that episode of the week quality, which I love about it, but does kind of suggest that you can wrap things up with a bow after a little bit of thoughtfulness. Suggests that there are grievances that run deeper, there's problems that run deeper, and that you could spend a lifetime or at least several years processing. So I really like that. And although there's a few characters, I still feel like at the end of season 1, like I need some more to kind of for them to grow on me. Bashir and Dax, I guess, would be kind of the notable ones. I like all of them.
Yeah, everyone has a rough time getting to like Bashir early on, but they do really get into some cool stuff with that character as you keep going. He has a secret.
Right. I'm looking forward to learning his secret.
But what you're talking about with the show, taking on a more and even though like in first season it's still very much episodic, but the way that they are, I feel
there's a growing or like an ongoing thing between Sisko and Kira. Their conflicting ideologies kind of weaves throughout and does form, if not an arc, you do see it as a continual rise and fall.
Well, the thing is with having a show set on the station, which was, the raw premise at the very beginning, earliest stages of development was, we can't make another show that's just like Next Generation. What can we do that's different? And the idea came to, we'll put it on a station instead of a ship. When you are stationary, things have consequences because you're not going to a different part of the galaxy each week. You're there. You
don't walk away from the civilization that you were dealing with.
Yeah, you're dealing with Bajor and the things going on with them gaining independence from the Cardassians, and that tension between the Cardassians and the Bajorans, and you can't escape that because that's built into your setting.
Right.
And so that naturally opened up the show to be more about, this is where we're going to, instead of telling a bunch of different stories, which it still does, but instead of focusing on radically different stories each week, it's going to build on to an ongoing story, because it has that root in where the space station at Bajor, we're at the mouth of the wormhole, and there's tension between the Bajorans and the Cardassians, and that evolves, but it can't go away. Like, that's inescapable for the show.
Right. I thought that setting it on a Deep Space Nine. What's the Cardassian name for it?
Terok Nor.
It was a mining station with was it like a forced labor kind of colony?
Yeah, and we explore the history of the station more in the future.
The fact that the Federation has a presence in what was formerly an oppressor's station is a really interesting idea, because they could have set it on a station that was a more standard starbase. They could have just
what's the modern day version of K7 or Space Dock that we see in the movies. But that makes the show and I say you could make the argument that Discovery is the most unique Star Trek show, but I still think Deep Space Nine is the most unique. And it being set on a weird alien space station makes it, that's so weird compared to the other Star Trek shows.
Yeah. Well, it has more weird stuff baked into its premise. There is a wormhole with mysterious entities in there. The wormhole opens up all its own possibilities. It works the same kind of in the same way that the Hellmouth did for Sunnydale and Buffy. It is it's the story generator for a lot of them. But it also has these long-term consequences that are that run as arcs. And then you have the fact that the planet they're in orbit around is important.
They're not in orbit of it anymore.
That's right. They moved to the wormhole, but they're near to.
Yeah, they're still in the solar system.
Yeah, it's true. I guess I don't have a sense for like the Bajoran solar system and exactly where the wormhole is like comparatively. Are there lots of planets in there?
There's a few, but they don't really go to.
It's not like they're notably inhabited.
Because there's like that Bajor 8, which was like in the episode, was it Past Prologue, where we have the Bajoran terrorist who he was buying the stuff from the Duras sisters there to make a weapon.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, they don't really. It's mainly Bajor and the wormhole. That's all we really care about. There's some moons that some grumpy farmers live on. But Dave, just to get more into the specifics of season 1.
Yep.
What were some of the things that really surprised you?
Let's see, things that surprised me. I think that there were some characters I kind of assumed probably never had a great deal of depth beforehand, like Odo. And Odo is kind of, he's in some way, he's a fixture. He's the kind of hard ass. But the episode that with Loxana Troy, and also the episode where he's pursuing
the Forsaken, I think.
Is that the one where he's pursuing the possibility of finding out about his people?
That was Vortex.
Vortex, yeah. So that and the one with Troy in it, both of them got into him, got into his character more, and I would sometimes see nuances, whether it was like his kind of sparring with Quark, but occasionally a little bit of like warm thunder there, just the hint of something about it, or of a friendly hate, frenemies. So Odo was one of those surprises. I think the biggest surprise, though, for me was how much Kira, what an interesting character was, and I actually think what a strong actress Nana Visitor is.
Yeah, and Kira's one of my favorite Star Trek characters. And
I can easily see she's already angling for like among my favorites.
And she's a character that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. They think of her as like, she's just kind of a bitch. She's mean. She yells at everyone.
That's what I thought. That's what I was thinking based on like the first one. She's the guy who's gonna like bite back at the captain.
But she has such an interesting story, especially early on here, where she's the freedom fighter, the terrorist. She's experienced horrible things. Her family were basically Jews in the Holocaust. And then she had to become a terrorist. She's killed Cardassian civilians sometimes in the struggle to liberate her people. She has to live with all of that shit. And now that they've gained their independence and they've established their own government and their own military, now she has to be the authority figure and wear a uniform. And we see the conflict that brings out in her in the episode Progress.
Right. That's the one where they're trying to get that old man off the planet.
Yeah, off the moon. One
of the stronger guest stars, I think, Brian Keith, who I remember as one of the cops in the movie Sharky's Machine. But I think in an episode that I felt like had a few ups and downs in it overall, but like his performance was so strong and her performance was so strong that I think it really elevated it. But yeah, that's the one where she has to deal with like, oh, this is what it's like to be on the flip side of the equation. This is what it's like to be the authority that what the fuck's the term? Of moving him displaces a civilian there.
Forced relocation.
Yeah, forced relocation. Now that one, I did wonder what they were, a little bit what they were intending to do there, because I feel like the obvious metaphor would be sort of a Native American exploitation kind of vibe.
I don't really think it has a obvious, like, real-life metaphor.
Because they were going to use it for such clearly benevolent purposes for the entire planet of Bajor, and, like, 3 people were holding it up.
Yeah. Did you notice that the other people on the moon that they had already moved off, it was 47 other people?
Oh, was that right?
Yeah.
The
use of the magic number 47.
That's funny. But yeah, I think more than anything, they wanted to see Kira on the other side of the equation. I do remember reading in some notes about it that the guy who wrote the episode actually intended for the farmer guy to be less likable. He kind of came across as a lovable curmudgeon as portrayed. He wanted him to be kind of more of an asshole who really didn't change over time and who was like almost more overtly adversarial with Kira.
That sounds so much not as good as what we got.
Yeah, I think kind of making it a difficult journey for her worked better. Where he was exasperating. Like I was like, but she was kind of turning on this sort of Zen patience sometime because she did have so much sympathy for him. Incidentally, my favorite, I think, Kira moment of the actress kind of like really letting her guard down and coming through was, I think it was, I'm trying to figure out, remind me what the episode was. What was the episode where they were on that planet where the two sides were warring and forever...
Battle Lines, I think?
Forever regenerating, yeah. It had the actor notable from Beyond Better Call Saul. He's a super good actor. He portrayed the lead scarred-up alien.
This is twice that you mentioned a cool guest star. Yeah. That was the good thing about Deep Space Nine, is that they get so many recognizable character actors. Mm-hmm. The casting for the show, they kind of go out of their way to get these really well-known, recognizable character actors.
That's cool.
And you'll see more of them if you keep watching.
But to go back to the Battle Lines episode, I think that's the one where... what do you call the religious leader who went down there?
Kai Opaka.
Kai Opaka.
Or Kai is the title. Opaka
Opaka's her name.
The name of the woman.
I think that's the one where Kira confesses to her that she's afraid that like the what were the Bajoran gods?
The prophets.
The prophets would not accept her when she died because of the horrible things she'd done.
Yeah, because of the guilt.
Yeah, and she completely breaks down doing it. Like, she's just not saying... She's saying, like, like, I don't want to get involved in this fight. And it seems like, oh, like, what are you, afraid of death or something? And she's like, no, I'm not afraid of death. And then she kind of, she chips away, like, sort of like a therapist or a counselor might to try and get to the root of the problem. And then, yeah, she has this moment where she breaks down. And I was like, oh... Wow, there's some real depth of acting and writing here, and that episode was a little on the nose at times. I think I noted it was written by Hilary Bader, who wrote some Batman animated series.
Yeah, she wrote a lot of superhero stuff.
But I still liked it. Episode, some of the performances elevated it, and it certainly fit very much in with Star Trek themes about kind of. Wars, the foolishness of war, but also kind of the cyclical nature of it, the domino avalanche quality of it just not always weighing on itself.
And one thing about that episode is that I kind of dislike that episode. It's one of my least favorite season 1 episodes.
Yep.
And even though I don't really enjoy it, I do enjoy parts of it. And Deep Space Nine is the more character-driven Star Trek show. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the episodes, like the one we were talking about a second ago, Progress, with the grumpy old man on the moon.
Yep.
There's very little narrative.
Right.
Kara goes...
Oh, yeah, it's literally almost entirely her talking to this guy, trying to talk him down.
It's all character.
Him being an exasperating old guy who goes off on stories and tangents. But, of course, they're not just random stories and tangents. They bring out things about her or him, and they're just interesting to watch kind of in and of themselves.
Right, and whereas, like, with Battle Lines, to me, like, it kind of feels more like a Star Trek Voyager episode, where they were much more narrative-focused.
Right.
And I always compare Deep Space Nine and Voyager, because... For me, as
you like it when it feels more organic, when the drama kind of comes more organically from the characters, and you don't feel like you've kind of got these set structures.
Yeah, and watching Star Trek as a kid, I had Voyager and Deep Space Nine were the two that were on, and I don't think I articulated this at the time when I was thinking about Star Trek, but I think one of the reasons why I like both of them, but why I like Deep Space Nine more is because it was more character focused. Voyager was more likely to do okay, what's like a cool little sci-fi science fiction concept, like maybe the ship gets split into two and there's two Voyagers phasing in and out of each other, or
and you feel like they probably started more like, let's see if we can find a way to put Odo at odds with himself, so that if they wanted to do that, it would come out of thinking how the characters would relate to it character before plot.
Yes, and the characters in Deep Space Nine in this first season, and I should say season 1 is my least favorite Deep Space Nine season. And every time I go to watch it,
there's a few mixed bag episodes in there, and I'm sure for you the characters all appear to be in their like what do you call it, nascent form or
Yeah,
whatever.
they're
They're proto
larvae. They haven't
Yes.
like grown into like a butterfly coming out of the
Right.
cocoon or whatever.
Right.
No, but you say that, but actually I'm impressed with how well developed and thought out the characters were, and I feel like that was the advantage of having Michael Piller around during the inception of the show, because he came into Next Generation.
Who is he?
Michael Piller.
The Michael Piller.
The writer.
Okay.
Who, he came into Next Generation in season 3 and really got that show on track. And by the time season 4 rolled
season 3
around,
is when things kind of felt like they were really starting to cook.
like halfway through season 3, and then season 4 through season 6 of Next Generation are pretty damn fantastic. And that was in large part due to Michael Piller. And then he was involved with the creation of Deep Space Nine, but he was a big character guy. And so, he was famously known for being able to work in what they called the Roddenberry box.
The strictures rather that Roddenberry had created.
Yeah, like the characters can have like long-lasting conflicts with each other and stuff like that. But he would come out with like all like these little character scenes, or he'd have like, Riker doesn't feel good about this, so he's sitting at a table talking to Troy about, I don't know, maybe I should take this promotion to captain and leave the Enterprise, and stuff like that.
He prompted those kind of moments.
Yes, and I think that's when like a big part of why the Next Generation got better was because they did get like that good handle on writing the characters.
Right, there was maybe a little bit more peppered in than it would be like core to Deep Space Nine, but yeah, it absolutely. I think those scenes. I think you're right. Made him feel grounded.
And then with Deep Space Nine, one of the genius things they did was not everyone is a Starfleet character. In fact, only like half the cast is.
Real quick, I just want to mention 2 other things that popped into my head while we were talking of things that surprised me, and that I can kind of say them real quick. One is also O'Brien. I knew him from Next Generation. Had no particular fondness for him. Almost immediately became one of my favorite characters on Deep Space Nine. Just like whenever he's around, he doesn't have like a ton of depth in the first season, but Colm Meaney's delivery of it all, when he gets exasperated especially, I always love him. I immediately liked him as kind of like the slightly put off guy sometimes, a little bit cranky, but like, a good friend and a pretty good husband, I would say to Keiko.
And people hate Keiko. But
I think we talked about this briefly before. I somewhat get it in the sense that she didn't get to do the things we traditionally like our heroes to do on Star Trek, but she set up a school. She stood up to the religious zealotry of the Bajorans. I think she kind of felt a little, I don't know what, shrewish or something. Is that the perception?
Yeah, she was often written to be kind of a
little bit of a fly in the ointment of O'Brien's good times.
Like,
I've got to get back to Keiko. But
she's like a bitchy wife.
Yeah.
On a sitcom.
Yeah, but I did not find that to be like my overwhelming thought on her. She actually seemed like someone who was getting shit done in a somewhat difficult situation on this station, where like her initial thing is she doesn't have anything to do.
Yeah, she's a botanist.
Yeah, so yeah, she sets up a school to kind of like that helping integrate Bajoran and human Federation culture.
Can we talk about the school for a second, and then we'll get back if you had any other surprises?
Yep.
But one of the things that I love about Deep Space Nine is how well they handled Jake and Nog.
Yeah.
Wesley Crusher not being the most popular character, you might think, why would they put kids on the station again? Right. But I love Jake and Nog and how that relationship evolves past season 1. But even in season 1, there's some cool stuff.
You know what's ironic? It's a little bit more like Will Wheaton was literally in Stand By Me, but the characters in Deep Space Nine feel a little bit more like the kind of stuff that happened in Stand By Me. They fuck around with stuff. They're irresponsible at times, and then there's an episode like where the big secret is that Jake is teaching Nog how to read and stuff. There's like
I love that reveal.
It's a very heartfelt moment, and I was like, where's this episode going? And so it kind of got to me. It was really nice.
We were talking about the episode Progress a second ago. I love in that Jake and Nog is that
their scheme one?
the J-Nog Consortium.
Right.
Yeah, they formed the J-Nog Consortium, and they're trying to get that 5 bars of latinums, and it sets up this recurring joke in Deep Space Nine about the self-sealing stem bolts.
Oh,
You'll hear a mention of it.
That's fantastic.
What was it? It was like 5 rapages of Cardassian yamik sauce got traded for 100 gross of self-sealing stem bolts.
I feel like, I don't know if this is based on a story by like O. Henry or something like that. It felt a little bit like what's his famous one? With the gift of the Magi, I guess.
Kind of like that.
But I feel like they might even be more specific than that. But yeah, they get some useless thing, they trade it for another useless thing, and they're trying to like, somewhere that needs to be the step 5 profit, and they never are quite getting there.
Yeah, and it's a good example early on of. I feel Deep Space Nine is one of the stronger shows when it comes to doing humor in Star Trek. I think the original series had a good handle on it.
I totally agree. In fact, that sort of ties into one of the other surprises I was going to say is that I felt like the overall level of writing, especially character writing, was a big uptick from what I had seen. I felt in many cases on Next Generation, and definitely like I think on Voyager and Enterprise. Like they definitely all of those shows had moments, but I felt like, especially for the first season, that the quality of writing was stronger. And because it's one of the things I like most about the original series is, their humor comes off, their timing is great. And I always felt it was a bit of one of the downsides to Next Generation and what followed. The stuff they get on there, and Jake and Nog, Quark, what do you call it, O'Brien being pissed off, the only ones that tend to fall a little flat are some of the ones that are elements of the 90s that don't hold up so well, like Bashir chasing after Dax like he's some kind of creepy incel.
He's kind of... I'm not going to say kind of. He's literally sexually harassing a coworker.
Yes.
Like it should be obvious to you at this point that like she's not into you, and it's you're bothering her and being disrespectful by not backing off.
Yeah.
But
I think the writers tried to show that it was not that big a deal because she would still like go out to dinner with him sometimes. It would clearly be a friend thing in her head, and he would be persistently hitting on her. In reality, she seemed untroubled by it. Like she sort of took it all with a grin. And the show actually never showed any behind the scenes thing like that's really bothering me. And I think that's really the writers just being kind of clueless about it. It was only a few decades ago, but people had some backward shit. It's just one minor weak point, but it's there. Same way you got to acknowledge the sexism in TOS. That one did not hold up.
You mean like Scotty like hating women because a woman was responsible for an explosion on the ship? You think that is problematic?
Look, Wolf in the Fold has a lot of problems.
I love the old 60s horror elements of that episode, but it is probably the most misogynist piece of Star Trek in existence.
Yeah, occasionally I also I love Space Seed, but her falling for Khan's cult of personality is a very tropey kind of thing too.
Yeah, the Khan approach doesn't work. But back to Deep Space Nine, we were talking about the humor. I'm just going to throw this out there. The best humor on Deep Space Nine tends to come from the Ferengi.
Yep.
And Ira Stephen Bear wrote the first Ferengi-centric episode of Deep Space Nine with
the Nagus.
The Nagus. So what did you think of the Nagus coming to visit?
I was worried.
Yeah?
Yes.
Inconceivable!
So, what's that guy's name? Sean
Wallace? Sean Wallace?
Yeah, whatever he is.
Another great character actor. Another great get for DS9.
Wallace Shawn. He's a great get, and he's super fun as the Grand Nagus. I sometimes find the broad humor of the Ferengi a little bit exasperating, but overall, that episode was a nice surprise. Let's see. That's the one where he gets assassinated. Quark gets the job, and you find out, of course, ultimately it was an elaborate ruse to see what his son would do. How he would react to it.
Yeah, and this was the episode where we got like the reveal with Jake teaching Nog how to read.
Right. That was one where I felt like I was kind of almost like the B plot for sure. That actually was the one that had more emotional weight. but the A plot was a good, fun one. And I've seen a few other ones like that late season Mirror Universe episode.
Yeah, season 7, The Emperor's New Cloak.
Yeah, super. Very Ferengi centric. And that one was really good. So I feel like it's an example of, I feel like they had a better handle on what maybe I wanted from the Ferengis humor than I had seen on Next Generation. I mean, also, Loaxana Troy is a trademark comedic character on Next Generation. Never been a big fan. I need to revisit some of those episodes again. But they went the opposite with her. They went serious for the most part, where with her crushing on Odo. But they trapped him in the safe.
Yeah, the trope of having like two characters stuck in a tight
elevator,
space.
safe, you name it, from the 1970s sitcoms and occasionally dramas, I guess.
Yeah, they did it on Enterprise with Shuttle Pod 1 and a few other times in Star Trek, but
surprisingly effective.
I was surprised to hear this was one of the ones that you really seem to like, because I know that you don't really care for Loaxana.
Well, because part of it was because it brought out something new in Odo, and because it gave that character depth that made me see her in a somewhat different light. And if you can make me see a character in an entirely different light, then you've definitely accomplished something. So yeah, I think that had the B plot where Bashir is trying to entertain a bunch of ambassadors that are kind of all a-holes.
There's a Bolian and a Vulcan and
right. And some of that, honestly, actually, that was a place where I thought some of the humor was a little bit weak in it. They were all kind of generically bitchy.
Did you think the humor was weak in the episode The Nagus when Nog tells substitute teacher O'Brien that the Vulcan stole his homework?
No, I think that was pretty good, actually.
But what you were saying about the Loaxana Troy appearance,
mm-hmm.
One thing they were doing in season 1, I guess, to try to tie things more into the Next Generation, they were bringing
guest stars.
Yeah, they were bringing in a lot of the recurring people from Next Generation, including
I think
Q,
that was a smart idea.
The Duras sisters.
Yep.
Vash.
Yep.
So, you want to talk about any of those?
Sure. Duras sisters. They weren't in the same episode with Q, were they?
No, they were in the episode with the terrorist who was trying to buy an explosive.
Oh yeah. That was an early on one. My note, and that's also had the first episode with Garrick, which it's the only episode.
His only season 1 episode,
right.
Which I've
seen him in a few later seasons, like 1 or 2 episodes you recommended to me, so I have some sense of him. But yeah, I was hoping to see more of him in the first season. Was a little disappointed he didn't show more.
But he does appear in at least 1 episode in every season, and normally he's in more than 1 episode. Mm-hmm. So you'll get to see more of him if you keep going. So
what's funny about the guest stars is that for the most part their appearances are not super strong to me, with the exception, weirdly, of Loaxana. The Q episode is a little bit lacking, despite the awesome, iconic Picard never punched me scene.
But I feel that was kind of forced, because I feel like that was so the writers of Deep Space Nine trying to be like, this guy isn't like Picard, we're totally different.
But everybody remembers it. But Sisko...
Q never shows up again, by the way. He never comes back to Deep Space Nine.
That sort of works.
And I think it's because Sisko's not fun.
Right, right. He actually was... He did tolerate a fair amount from Q at times overall. He kind of still had to put on the Picard and be like, okay, what next? That kind of, what are just like an exasperated parent. But I think that was a good bit, honestly. I think they were actually right to do it, and because it sticks with you. But when I was looking up the episode, that's the one where I think Q is, trying to draw Vash back into the fold. She's going to go maybe work at the Daystrom Institute. And the John Delancey, I saw in some behind-the-scenes notes, said that Q is best used when he deals with large philosophical issues, and skirt chasing just isn't one of them. Unfortunately true.
And did we really need an episode where Q is like, oh, these dumb humans, are they going to be able to figure out the mystery of what's going on here? Or will they all be destroyed because it's so dangerous? And it turns out it's a space stingray. Kind of like an encounter at Farpoint where the same thing happened except it was a space jellyfish.
Maybe you can go someplace in Discovery, and there can be like a space manatee.
Yeah.
Or they can bring back
bring back the tardigrade.
Bring back the tardigrade. But it was actually of course I liked Sin-Q. I like Vosh as a character, even though she was never quite developed to the point where I wanted. But
this is the worst episode for either one of those.
It kind of is true. The Duras sisters were fine.
They were a plot device.
But yeah. So here's the thing. On a gut level, which is I'm sure what they kind of wanted to work, I was happy to see those characters because they did tie it to Next Generation. And they made it feel part of the tapestry. It's too bad they weren't better. But at the same time, some of seeing them was a little bit its own reward. So I'll somewhat let them off the hook for that. I don't think it's like a colossal failure. It's because they were figuring out everything in the first season. By the way, that episode that you just mentioned, the past prologue one, the fact that I think the guy was trying to destroy the wormhole there so that the Federation would have no reason to have a presence there.
Yeah,
because he saw them as like kind of like the next oppressors, or for Bajor. I did think that was like. And that's just, that was the first episode, post-premiere episode. That also set the stage for the kind of complex politics and that these wounds run deep, which will be a thread through, clearly throughout the whole series, but even just in the first season, it shows up all over the place.
And another cool thing about that episode is that you set up the Bajorans in the pilot as, these sympathetic aliens that, the Federation is here to help the people. It's largely built around that. Mm-hmm. But we see there are some Bajoran bad guys, and there's some Bajoran ambiguous characters. And
right. Kira often finds herself torn. Her loyalty's torn is like, well, I have some sympathy for this guy, but I'm not going to let innocents die. Or I have some sympathy for this guy, and I'm going to let it slide.
The next episode after that, Babel... Mm-hmm. Where they're all kind of going cracker, duck, mirror glass.
Yeah, they have I believe they call it aphasia. But it's like a virus that affects the language centers of the brain, and so they just start talking gibberish.
TV visor. But yeah,
I liked how they did it actually, because the characters would actually speak in sentences where you could clearly get the intonation of it. You were like, oh, he's saying something comforting here, but it's coming out as just random string of words, but it still has the tone you recognize.
Do you know how they accomplish that?
No.
It's because the writers, they would write what the characters are trying to say, and then they would show that to the actors and be like, oh, so you're trying to say this,
right? But
instead you're saying all this bizarre, stupid stuff.
Right.
So that the actors knew how to deliver the lines.
I assume there had to be some particular method to it, and that's simple but direct way to do it. But I thought it was super effective.
The Bajorans are kind of the bad guys in that, because it was the virus got started. It was a booby trap that some Bajoran terrorists planted on the station in the replicator system.
Right. But arguably to throw off their oppressors.
Yeah, and then they got killed before it ever...
Right.
Went off. They got It makes it realistic.
It does. I feel like the episode... I don't think that was one of those episodes that was meaning to call into question the tactics of, say, the Resistance fighters. It was just what happened to be what triggered it in this case. A bit of luck.
Right.
But it's sort of like... I suppose you could think of it the way that landmines operate in the real world. It's like... It is a cheap and terrifying way to make a territory unapproachable, and then it's going to screw the hell out of future generations. So that this could be seen as something like that. Although that's a pretty sophisticated way to do it.
That was where you have O'Brien trying to repair the replicator systems. And stuff.
One of those moments where I was immediately like, I like O'Brien.
Anyone who's ever worked an IT job can find that episode relatable.
Yeah.
Where O'Brien's kind of overtaxed. Everyone's wanting everything fixed.
I don't know if it's Cisco or somebody who says, "Chief, could you get on that?" And he's got this look like if you say one more fucking word.
Yeah.
But I was like O'Brien is my man now. That episode. Let's see. I think there was that episode because of the kind of warming to O'Brien. And also, because I thought the virus was portrayed as a strong dramatic thing, it seems scary to me. The notion of losing your language capacity that way, and being not only unable to communicate with loved ones, but unable to say what's wrong with you or anything like that. was a pretty creepy thing.
Especially when you see it with Jake, with the kid.
Yep. And I think that was the actor who portrays him, I thought did a really good job.
Yeah, Sarah Lofton.
Mm-hmm.
And when it happens to Kara, and she it dawns on her like, oh my god, no one can understand me. Like her reaction to it, like she sold that pretty well.
Yep.
And I love that Quark and Odo were like the last two who didn't.
Was it because they weren't human, the least human of them?
Well,
which comes up in another episode, too.
Yeah, where a lot of stuff doesn't affect Odo because he's not a humanoid.
Right.
Quark
and his biology is
like,
wildly different.
Quark was just like, yes, you're underestimating the Ferengi immune system. I like to believe that he's just like so greedy that like his greed, he's so driven.
He's like one-track mind.
Yeah,
and that like it can't overwhelm that with complications.
It has that scene, and some people might think this is a little too cheesy, but I thought it was good humor. I thought it was funny, where he's trying to like get money from the people who like didn't pay their bar tabs, and he's like he's trying to communicate with them. He's like, you, me, money, oh.
Armin Shimmerman was another. Armin Shimmerman. Yeah. Was another one of the unexpected surprises. I really like his portrayal of Quark, and I thought Quark would be one note. Quark is, like Odo, a focused character. He's got a... You kind of, in some ways, you always know what he would do in a given situation. Almost always. But his portrayal of him is almost always either funny or he throws... They write him so that he will unexpectedly... Sometimes in service to something that serves him, he will of course be of assistance. But he's got some guile mixed in with his humor... And I really liked his portrayal of him. So
yeah, and he his performance is kind of the definitive depiction of Ferengi, who were, I guess, a neat idea going into the Next Generation that was poorly executed.
Right, they clearly wanted him to be hot shit early on.
They're supposed to be the new Klingons,
right? And the notion of like, what would they be, like corporate raider aliens? Is that how you kind of conceive of them? And
it is interesting.
Makes a lot of sense, but they did not convey the threat that I'm sure Roddenberry wanted them to.
Yeah. And I think it is interesting that, in the 60s, the main bad guys were stand-in for the Soviets, for the Klingons.
Right.
And we have a stand-in for the Cold War. And then in the 80s, things had kind of evolved at the point to where Star Trek was more self-reflective.
Right.
And so, okay, well, the big bad guys now are, corporate greed. And that completely changed the way that Star Trek kind of viewed the good guys and the bad guys. But, yeah, they dropped the ball on it in the Next Generation. And I don't know whose idea, I think it might have been Michael Pillar's. I don't know whose idea it was to have a Ferengi regular character on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
That was a pretty bold thing to do.
Yeah.
But they did it so well.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that, because Quark is another character that's very near and dear to my heart that I loved watching, growing up.
Yeah, and because these characters start out, I think, pretty strong, even in a first season that's, you might, and I've heard this from other people, is arguably the weakest. I'm very much looking forward to see where they go. And that'll be kind of exciting to see for the first time, because I'm really liking them. So this was kind of a weird one, because I don't necessarily think it's a great episode, but I really enjoyed it. And one was Captive Pursuit.
I love Captive Pursuit.
It's essentially like a space fox hunt. They're chasing this guy. He happens to, he gets picked up on DS9. He forms a friendship with O'Brien, which I enjoyed on both their parts. I liked the O'Brien's, Colm Meaney's portrayal, but I also liked how this lizardy alien guy looked. But
Tosk.
Was it?
Tosk.
And, eventually the hunters come gunning for him. And at that point, nobody on DS9 knows, they don't know the score yet. They don't know that this guy kind of lives for eluding his pursuers. And that, the Women of War podcast likened it to almost like, I think they didn't like that it wasn't discussed in greater depth, because to them it sounded, I think, like this guy had been groomed, in the same creepy way that a pedophile grooms like a child to want what they have. And I was like, I do think that is, there's a legit complaint to be had there.
There's some validity there, but I
well, you know
disagree.
What I liked it? It was because to me it did feel like, in a good way, like a TOS episode, where there's kind of a problem that gets resolved in a way that, like, if you think about it kind of hard, or, like, think about it a little bit, okay, maybe they didn't do the best thing, but they did something that was dramatically satisfying and was a cool ending, because essentially, like, O'Brien is like, this guy gets busted and nobody's happy. He's like, they're going to take me home. I'm in shame. They didn't get a good hunt out of it, and so they're in shame. And so O'Brien, like, rigs some stuff so that this guy can bust out and kick their asses one more time and lead them, and the chase can keep going. Now, you could argue that they did not really solve a problem. He just solved a very immediate issue, but it was dramatically satisfying.
And this was the first time that O'Brien ever really takes center stage, and you have, like, an O'Brien-focused episode, which becomes a recurring thing in DS9. And like you, I really love O'Brien. I think he's a super relatable character. Even though I'm not really like a family guy. I don't have any kids or anything. But I find he's like the blue collar everyman that I think he's a lot easier to connect to than, like Picard, who's like this like super smart, sophisticated, older guy that's very professional. And
Picard is great to watch, hard to connect to.
Spock has a computer brain. I can't really relate to that, but like, O'Brien I get. Like, I mean, that's a guy I could like hang out with, have a beer with.
And, for sure.
And his
we'll have to talk about that on some other episode. The best for various situations. I think we don't want to confine it to just who would be best to have a beer with, but like, who would be best to go catch a movie with? Who would be best to go out on a date with? Et cetera, et cetera.
Best to go out on the date with would be like the fake sex kitten version of Jadzia that Bashir dreams of.
Why do you have to take it there?
But we might get into that episode in a second. But just more on Captive Pursuit. When O'Brien does go on his like plan to like help Tosk escape, and Sisko is like, Odo, we got to stop him. But then he's like, there's no need to get in a hurry. Or, whatever he says.
Which, by the way, very TOS kind of thing. I felt like that kind of Kirk sort of kind of looking the other way to, it's a little bit like beaming the Tribbles onto the Klingon ship.
Well, that was Scotty who did that.
Right, but what I mean is like somebody in authority doing something that, if you thought about it, is really a kind of a bad thing.
If you think about it, saying where there'll be no Tribble at all really isn't that funny.
But super awesome as a kind of a little bit of a fun capper.
Dramatic satisfaction is definitely had. But yeah, and we see Sisko bend the rules a couple of times, like in the episode Dax, where he tells the doctor, he's like, we need some type of medical proof saying that one Trill is different from the Trill they were when the symbiote had a different host.
Right.
And Bashir's kind of like, well, what if I find evidence that suggests the contrary? And then Sisko's like, well, we're not interested in that. Like,
right.
He'll bend the rules a couple times.
Who's the actor who plays Sisko?
Avery Brooks.
Avery Brooks. He does a great job, and he surprised me in ways, in different ways than I expected. Like, I knew from the first episode that he was going to be able to sort of reach some Shakespearean heights, but I like that he could be duplicitous at times. He also is sometimes, he's the voice of the Federation, sometimes unwillingly, but sometimes he's the rock in a hard place for Kira. But I love like those scenes he would have with Jake, where he was just a dad, and like he has a naturalism even for a guy who's kind of Shakespearean. It's kind of a Shakespearean naturalism where he drops his guard down, he'll kiss Jake, he'll kind of hold him tight. His little hand mannerisms, and so I started to pick up on certain things he does somewhat commonly. But they felt naturally. They felt like something a person would really do, and I started to think of him more as a 3-dimensional person than I thought I was going to.
Well, that was another like my weird thing watching DS9 as a kid. Because I always was like, I wish I had a relationship with my dad like Jake and Sisko have. That was like, if you asked me as a kid, like if I could be like any Star Trek character, I'd probably say, I want to be Worf. Right. Or like, I want to be Spock. I want to be super. But I think really, like, I wanted to be Jake. I wanted to like go live on Deep Space Nine and go like throw a baseball back and forth with my captain dad on the holosuite.
Yeah. No, I get it, and that's.
Would a lot of people think Avery Brooks' performance is weird? Like some of his line delivery is weird.
I mean, in some ways it is, but I mean, only in the sense that he doesn't play. All captains in Star Trek are somewhat heightened. They all are a little bit larger than life in some way. I would say maybe the person who is least, I feel like, might be Archer.
Are you saying William Shatner's performance as Kirk might have been a little like...
A touch, you know, like if you got to squint to see it, but you can look.
He goes big sometimes,
a little bit. Avery Brooks had a different way of going big, you know, in some ways, you know, what I feel is like the same way I've seen it does go to kind of Shakespearean actors. The way I'll see them portray big, but also kind of play intimate and small moments with like kind of depth, but it's still a slightly larger than life depth. I feel like he does that consistently, and he's the commanding presence on the screen when he comes in. When he comes in, he's going to dominate a room. He's got that deep stentorian voice. Is stentorian the right word? I don't know. I'm going to say he's got a deep voice anyway. And he kind of dominates a room when he's in it, which is always good for a captain. And I felt like I felt like he was human too. So yeah, he was another character out there. Leader types are sometimes difficult in kind of genre fiction because they feel like the guys who have to play by the rules very often, and they can be a little stiff. But Star Trek usually does pretty good by its leader types, and I'm looking forward to see him grow into the person I know he does. But like I did like him right out of the gate.
And they clearly have the mandate. You know, let's make this guy different from Picard. The first 3 seasons of DS9, Avery Brooks has hair. He wanted to shave his head and be bald, and they're like...
From the get-go?
Yeah, and I don't know if this was the reason, but I think it's like, well, they want him to be different from Picard, so like they want him to have hair.
Right.
Patrick Stewart is famously bald. He has an incredibly shiny head.
Yes.
And also I think with like someone like the... You know, he's the guy who will punch... Q.
Right, or strong-arm Quark into staying on the station.
Yeah, and even like... and they find all kinds of ways to make him... You know, he's not compromised ethically. He's still very much the guy with the Federation values.
Right.
But he doesn't have like the same respect for, you know, the rules and systems that Picard might have, you know, the procedures. He's more of like... eager to just get the result. Like he tells Bashir, another example is like when Kira was going back to the moon and Progress, the old man, and he was like, you come up with a medical reason to justify like why she's still on this moon with this guy, and you know, like he does kind of earn the reputation as like the rule breaker captain, and I feel like that's often exaggerated. Like it's not he's not like a renegade.
There were a lot of episodes where he's like, look, I don't like this any more than you do, Kira, but we have to represent, you know, the rule of law.
Yeah.
And so, but he's like, you find me anything on this person or whatever, and we'll bring him down hard. But we got to find something. But yeah, he looks the other way, and several times, even in that first season, over small things. Not big transgressions, but there's a little bit of recognition of, for sure, his position is going to require some rule bending.
I mean, Quark himself is a criminal.
Right, right.
And they all kind of know it, but
he was straight up hiring mercenaries in that one episode.
Yeah, and that's... In the early seasons, he is a little bit more of a...
More shady?
Yeah, And you'll see like where they go with that, but just any other favorite episodes that you feel like we gotta cover?
Let's see. I think we hit most of them. I liked the episode Dax as a sort of legal
courtroom
drama,
backstory,
and you know, in addition to like revealing a lot about the Trill through a courtroom drama, which I thought was a clever way to do. I was thinking about like, you know, all the stuff that went into this. So you had like. Backstory for Dax, revelations about the biology of the Trill.
First time we learn anything about Curzon.
That's true, and I always like Curzon. In some ways, I do still occasionally kind of think, would I like Dax more if she was was like Curzon? You know, like the kind of the larger, the brash, larger than life guy that Sisko is always remembering. He talks about him in such colorful ways. That like I almost feel like that I'd prefer that over Dax, who's very kind of demure in her general the way she carries herself. But that episode also had like the kind of revelations about this rebel leader who was in fact he was like a traitor, right? and Curzon had an affair. There was like sex, drugs, all the stuff that just goes into a good legal thriller, not like war crime type stuff. And a guy who's I guess what it was, like the militia or whatever had turned on him and were going to kill him. Basically, there's an acknowledgement that he would be a better symbol to the resistance in death than he actually was.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting, all sorts of meaty drama in there. So that was another episode I liked. And let's see, mentioned Vortex. I thought that actor who portrayed, was it Croton?
Yeah, and that's the episode with the criminal that Odo has to escort back through the wormhole.
Yep. I thought that guy had brought a lot of depth to a character who was actually, like, at first in the episode I was like, oh, this guy seems a little, he's kind of annoying me. But then by the end of the episode, he's alternately kind of like provocative and kind of sympathetic, and like he's kind of roguish at times. I ended up liking him a lot, and I kind of would like to know what happened to him after the episode.
Yeah, sadly that never gets explored.
When I get around to writing my Trek novel, I'll see if I can work it in.
This is also like not the first time, but one of the early times where they start talking about like Odo's mysterious origins and how
I like that there was a little kernel of truth here and there in what the guy was saying based on sort of legends, but overall the guy was pulling a Kaiser Soze.
So you'll notice that people from the other side of the wormhole, from the Gamma Quadrant, they use the term changeling.
Right.
And most of them do seem to have some knowledge of, these shapeshifters, these changelings. They're all kind of like, oh yeah, there's legends of that on my world, or I always heard that they existed at one time. And so they are planting seeds there that may be building to something.
Cool. I'm down for it. And I don't know how that all plays out, so I'm interested.
I'm going to mention Voyager again, and I'm not bashing on Voyager. I think it's a good show, but I do like DS9 a bit more.
Right.
One of the things on Voyager that they promised early on was that because they were set in the Delta Quadrant, 70,000 light years away.
Weird stuff.
Yeah, more weird aliens.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like DS9 did a better job of that early on. The first alien we meet is Tosk. And I like that idea of like, yeah, this guy who's like his whole purpose in life is to be like this prey, and he even says like, I live the greatest adventure of all.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a weird, you don't see like Klingons or Romulans or Tholians or anyone we know in the normal corner of the Star Trek universe doing that.
Yeah.
And then the idea of like these changelings that the Odo is basically like this big blob that can take any shape or form. Like, that's very different, even though there have been some shape-shifting, like in Star Trek VI, but...
And let's not forget these super exotic aliens who like to play games.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to talk about Move Along Home.
I believe neither that nor the Rumpelstiltskin episode were the terrors that I thought that they might be.
Yeah, and a lot of people hate both those episodes. A lot of people consider those the two worst episodes of DS9.
Just real quick, when I was kind of making a few notes about this before we did the podcast, I was rewatching a few of the trailers, and I rewatched the one for the one. What's the one with the gaming aliens?
Move Along Home.
Move Along Home, right?
The Wadi.
And as I was watching it, and I saw the aliens, the trailer for it with the original deep voiced guy next time on Deep Space Nine. I saw the kind of crazy alien mullets, and I was like. That was a fun episode. I felt warmly towards it, and not like, oh Jesus.
Yeah, I love.
Yes, a little out there, but
I love the twist ending. Where like, oh yeah, they were never in danger,
right?
Which that does kind of like undercut the whole episode. It's kind of lame to be like they were never in jeopardy. But...
I sort of wanted Cisco to go up and like give him the Q treatment and say like, if it felt like it, then it was it, and just like pop him one, but the getting there was cool. I liked the kind of weird sort of team up that happens between Quark and Odo, and the kind of the weird push pull where they don't quite know, is this really, Odo has to kind of figure out that this game is clearly literally threatening the lives, or at least he thinks, of half the crew members.
You know why I think a lot of people hate it?
Huh?
Is just because of Alamarane, count to 4, Alamarane, then 3 more, Alamarane, if you can see.
If the captain says it in his deep voice, then...
He has a good singing voice. And
he does.
Alamo Rain. And then I love Kira's reaction where you could just tell, like, oh, she hates having to do this.
Yeah.
And she has to, like, hop and skip and sing the dumb song.
Sometimes it's fun to watch people who are normally stoic or fucking serious as hell have to do silly shit. And I think Star Trek has often done that. I'm thinking of you, I'm Mud? I'm thinking of the stuff that they had to do to mess with the robots at the end of that.
Yeah.
Lots of good times. Chekhov, especially there. And it's fun to watch the actors you've kind of come to like have to do some silly shit. And you know, and it's a fun episode. That felt like also kind of a TOS episode. You know, trapped inside an alien game is a kind of old schoolish idea.
But I love the idea of just like these gamer aliens.
Yeah.
Like, they just want to play games.
As soon as they get there, they're like, oh, wow, it's a first contact. And they're like, where is the game room?
Yeah. It makes me wonder if they'd be like into a bunch of like Earth board games or D&D or video games.
Show me Settlers of Catan.
Yeah.
They're like, don't you want to meet our leaders after the game?
And then we should also talk about If Wishes Were Horses.
Sure, let's
the other
throw it out.
Super hated episode.
Yep. These are aliens who want to explore the concept of imagination, which they don't. Another classic kind of Trek trope is that aliens who don't understand some aspect of almost every race in the universe, and they do something to push people into weird acts of it. So who did we get in this? O'Brien sees Rumpelstiltskin because he was reading to his daughter.
Yeah. Bashir has this...
He's fantasizing about Dax, and so he gets the docile version of her, which is the version that he wants, I guess.
I dislike that, even though I made a joke about it earlier, because it's like, no, Bashir should like he should have like an appreciation for Dax's, you know, intelligence. And,
yeah,
there's other things that make her attractive besides just her.
Right, but I could get like on a primal level that your mind might go there.
I did just say earlier that would be like the best Star Trek character to go on a date with, but
yeah. Then the captain sees a baseball player.
Buck Bukai, a fictional baseball player who played for the London Kings,
yep.
A fictional baseball team that will exist at some point in the future.
Yep.
And the cool thing is that he gives Cisco his baseball,
mm-hmm.
and Cisco keeps that like on his desk.
That stays for the series?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I actually thought that some of the best dramatic scenes in that episode were him talking to him about what he meant. And they kind of had this little philosophical back and forth about, well, is this conversation even meaningful if you're just like a simulation of him? But then he kind of gets pulled into talking about how meaningful he was to him. And I thought there's at least some interesting bits in there about, you know, how fantasies and imagination can have importance. You could definitely say this episode did not all come together. But it was not a monstrosity.
And I mean, it is revealed these are all just like aliens pretending because they're trying to explore again this idea of like we're stuck on a station, people are coming to us,
right?
And so they're exploring by disguising themselves as people that people imagine.
Yes,
yeah, there are some weaknesses there, but
by the way, the Rumpelstiltskin guy is kind of funny tormenting them. But because, you know, like my favorite thing now, I guess thinking about it more concrete, is when people piss off O'Brien.
Yeah.
And so having him just sitting around on like the computer top while O'Brien's trying to get something done, just funny to me.
And I loved O'Brien reading the story to Molly,
mm-hmm. His daughter. Yeah.
He like it kind of feels like O'Brien wouldn't be that good of an actor, like getting into character, like doing a different voice for everyone.
Right. But maybe it's more like he like lets his guard down around his kid.
Yeah, around his kid. That's how I justified it.
Yeah. I think I had that same thought while I was watching it. I was like, he's doing a better job than you think so, kind of for lunk-headed O'Brien.
That makes it kind of sweet that he would like, you know, go the extra mile to do that for his kid.
Yeah.
It's something as trivial as like a bedtime story.
I agree.
We've touched on pretty much every episode except for
the last two.
Only like 3 or 4, but yeah, I definitely want to talk about the last 2.
Yeah.
And I think we'll close on that. Just before we get to that, I'm just going to throw in another episode that I seem to like more than other people, The Storyteller.
This is like a sort of like, is it like a little sort of rural sort of village?
Yeah.
On Bajor, and they have this ceremony or this thing where once a year this kind of spirit entity like like every night for a week or something like that, it comes to assault them, and the storyteller leads the group in like reciting the ancient myth, and everybody kind of rallies around it, and they drive away the evil spirit.
The Dalrock is what it's called, which is like a weird cloud thing that forms and attacks this Bajoran village for some reason.
And O'Brien, who seems the least priestly guy you could think of, kind of ends up in that role.
But it was all so that the other guy can actually get his opportunity.
Right.
The apprentice, who like the village didn't really support.
Right. Had no confidence.
But because O'Brien is such a failure,
yeah, he steps up.
Yeah, and he gets his chance to shine.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was a good episode. I can't remember quite why it didn't resonate a little bit more, but I definitely enjoyed it.
Just two things on it, and then we'll move on, that I really enjoy about it, is because it is an early Bashir and O'Brien episode.
Oh, right. And that'll become more of a thing as we go along.
That relationship really grows and evolves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like the first important milestone in that arc.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love the B story, which was, again, with the kids, with Jake and Nog.
Oh, is this where they had the crush on the ambassador girl?
The Bajoran girl who was negotiating a border dispute.
Yep.
And I like that moment where they were talking about like going to their dads for advice, where Jake says like, I can always go to my dad for advice, and Nog is like, yeah, I go to my dad for advice too. And she's like, does it help? And Jake is like, yeah. And Nog is like, no.
Yeah.
Because Nog's dad is an idiot.
Yes.
But,
yeah, no, that's pretty good.
But just moving on past that, another one before we get to the last two is Dramatic Persona.
Yep.
That was the bottle show. It's just set entirely on the station. I should say, by the way, that DS9, they kind of overblew their budget in the first episode.
Uh-huh.
And they built all these great elaborate sets. Mm-hmm. And I love the sets on DS9. I love that they're self-lit and you get a lot of contrast and you can photograph from so many different angles and get so many different shots because everything is lit.
Right. And Cardassians built weird ships.
Yeah.
Weird stations.
Yeah, it's a unique design.
Yep.
But yeah, they spent a lot of money early on, so the first season does suffer by being, every episode after that being very cheap.
That's interesting. I did think that generally, though, it looked really good. Like, I was impressed at how good everything looked.
But like, you get episodes like Dramatic Persona, which is set entirely on the station with no guest stars except for that one Klingon we see. Mm-hmm. But that's where everyone gets infected with the thing that makes them all paranoid.
Yeah,
and
essentially the feuding aliens from the past. I think because it becomes apparent very early on that something like that is happening, but the episode takes a while for Odo to kind of piece it together specifically. I was disappointed in it. I think that if it had been based more on like their natural personalities, like it seemed like at first, like they're like where O'Brien is like, well, you need to pick a side. There's clearly something's gonna go down between the captain and Kira. So whose side are you on, Odo? And I was like, okay, well, they're the naturally headbutting characters anyway, so that made sense. But then you see there's kind of some other elements, and the captain is building this watch or this clock thing,
which also stays in his office.
That's a nice touch. It's a nice touch. But yeah, I just the sparks were not quite enough to, I think, make this bottle episode take life.
Yeah, and it's not a good episode, but I enjoy the shit out of parts of it just because of how weird it is. Mm-hmm. And like I love like paranoid O'Brien. He like puts like those guards in front of like Cisco's office.
Yeah.
I love like O'Brien does like that log entry where he's saying all like this weird paranoid shit, mm-hmm. and it just makes everything feel more off kilter. And
I think, by the way, too, Avery Brooks was probably having a good time playing the sudden outburst captain who was like, "Don't bother me," or like when he does go off, he he's ready to kill somebody.
When O'Brien says something like, I think Kira is trying to drive us off the station, and then that's when Sisko snaps, and he's just like, never! And then I love Avery Brooks gets to be so weird in this one, and I love what he's telling Kira, and it's just, I can't watch it with a straight face, where he says, I understand history. My name will blaze across the stars long after your petty treachery has been forgotten. Like the most bizarre, unnatural dialogue.
Yeah,
this melodramatic.
It does have to I think that's one of the things I would like to know most, and I'm sure it's been discussed in endless interviews, is whether they enjoyed those moments or not. They see so many different things: big drama, big sad scenes, but sometimes crazy scenes.
But yeah, we'll move on to the
dramatic heavyweights.
Yeah, these are the big 2 episodes of the season, especially the penultimate season 1 episode, Duet.
I liked both of them, but I think I liked The Hands of the Prophets better. And I think part of it was because Duet, although it was so beautifully acted and really intense, I wasn't 100% sure I was happy with the morality of it. So let's say what the episode was.
Yeah, so Duet is the one where this Cardassian is on board the station. They believe he is the war criminal Gul Darhil,
who presided over essentially a concentration camp.
Yeah, well, it's a forced labor camp,
right? But with horrible atrocities, and they describe him in pretty graphic terms for Star Trek. Kira says.
Mothers raped in front of their children, husbands beaten until their wives couldn't recognize them, and old people buried alive because they couldn't work anymore.
Yeah, really horrific concentration camp, clearly analogous to. And so in a way that this guy that they think that they've caught, although the easy comparison would be to somebody like Mengele or something like that. I guess he wasn't literally a mad scientist kind of type person like that. But he oversaw, really horrible acts that went on at the labor camp. Or so they think.
Yeah, and it turns out that he was this file clerk, Maritza.
They actually have a kind of neat mystery about it that involves enhancing images a little bit Blade Runner style. Yeah. And they have to figure out who he really is.
Because at first they think he's Gul Darhil, pretending to be a file clerk named Maritza.
Right, the equivalent of a Nazi hiding out in South America under, the name of somebody else.
But then it turns out he's actually Maritza, who has disguised himself to look like Gul Darhil so that he could be captured and forced to stand trial on Bajor and make Cardassia acknowledge
the
atrocities, because he was there as a file clerk and witnessed this. And I love that performance where he's trying to be this super evil, just outright most ridiculous, despicable.
Yeah. And you say ridiculous, being. But it still is the way it affects Kira. It doesn't come across as ridiculous. He is very evil, but it's it's disturbing because he's he's trying to get a rise out of her, but it sounds like he's probably telling the truth that he's really.
Yeah, it's disturbing because it's believable.
Right, and she's in an interesting position too because Captain recognizes she is kind of morally compromised in this situation. She has an agenda. She wants to bring this guy down as hard as possible, but she has to rein herself in and kind of be that side of law and order who tries to get him to trip himself up, and he's only too happy to do it. And then only near the very end do they realize that he has this, that he essentially is doing it to not redemption, but he's not trying to redeem himself. He's trying to implicate the Cardassians. He's trying to make them face what they did. But it's because he felt that he was a clerk. He was nothing more than a clerk at a concentration camp, and he looked the other way and was a coward while these atrocities happened around him. So it has stayed with him and haunted him. Now, here's where I had the issue with it, sort of.
Before we get to the issue, we should acknowledge that big hard-hitting moment where he makes that switch from his guise that he's put on to when he breaks down and starts sobbing.
Yeah.
And it admits that, it was so hard, having to hear those screams every night, and I felt so guilty for being a part of that through my inaction, and Kira doesn't really hold it against him. She was like, there wasn't anything you could do, but he's saying like, it's so important that we do make for Cardassia to be a good, prosperous society. We have to come clean and admit to what we did here.
Right.
And then
it's a great performance from that actor.
And it's my favorite episode of season 1, which is a very common opinion. But Dave, tell me what your problem with it was.
That his explanation of his cowardice or whatever, although moving, does sound an awful lot like just following orders. And I felt like Kira, I think, I was not sure... First of all, I wasn't 100% sure if I felt she actually called him a hero for what he was trying to do. Now, he was trying to, it had his plan kind of come off, it would have forced Cardassia to potentially, this is a big thing to try and to pull off, is an entire planet, entire society admitting its role in atrocities. That is a big thing, and she called him a hero before he dies.
I think that was heroic. I think that's fair.
It was heroic, but was he just following orders, or it's like if a Nazi had not been jailed or hung after that, and wanted Germany to own up to what they had done, would he be a hero, or is he a person who guilt did enough of a number on that he tried to turn it into a positive? So to take it to a real world example, would you, if you found out about a clerk at a Nazi concentration camp, do you feel that do you feel sympathy for him? Do you feel, or did you feel? Because I feel like that comes down to just following.
I don't see it necessary to find an exact real world comparison.
I feel like this one is kind of close,
but it is kind of close. But yeah, I feel like to me it's very believable that there would be a guy who he's a clerk for the military, and he's forced to witness this horrendous events, and he's terrified by it, and he's like, he says like, I was.
Do I find it believable on his part? Absolutely. I do. But I don't tend to have a lot of sympathy for people who were just following orders. Just because he was not if he had been one of the ones who was called upon to perform the atrocities, and was still doing the exact same thing he did, would you feel as sympathetic toward him? I did not think that clerk could have overthrown the Cardassian camp.
I don't blame him.
But surely he... maybe he didn't see the writing on the wall.
I don't blame him for not finding an opportunity there. For me, that would make it come off as more contrived. It's true. I think
But Star Trek sometimes does show a sort of an idealized version of how things could have gone.
Yeah, but I that's why I give this episode credit for not doing that.
Yep. I think the weirdest thing for me was I felt like Kira, having seen all she did, maybe was a little too quick to forgive him.
But I love that it gives that layer to Kira that as much of a radical as she was, she's still has enough of a good heart that she doesn't she doesn't hate every Cardassian.
Right.
If there's a Cardassian on the other side and she's like, no, I'm glad that you're able to see how.
Right. Well, this guy was clearly doing more than probably any Cardassian she'd ever seen to potentially help the Bajoran people. I thought it was a little bit weird that the episode went so out of their way to call him a hero at the end, though. That felt a little dodgy to me somehow. But I suppose when you consider, and part of it is I hadn't talked about this episode with anybody, so I'm kind of still processing it.
But the biggest part of it is, I think, is that he's killed by that Bajoran.
Right.
And it shows that it's so Roddenberry, it's so Star Trek to explore the danger of just blind bigotry and hatred when you have basically that Bajoran committed a hate crime,
right?
If they tell him why did you do this? This isn't even Goldar Hill. He's like, I don't care. He's still a Cardassian.
Right.
Fuck him. I'm glad he's dead.
Right. It for sure. It speaks to the same in a probably much stronger way overall than say Battle Lines. Battle Lines.
Yeah.
To the idea that of how war self-perpetuates and old hatreds just bring everything down. But at the same time, Kira was, she got to see something that nobody else saw. Personal experience can change you, but it's hard to without personal experience to kind of, I think, forgive sometimes. So, yeah, it's a deep episode, and some of their best performances, I think.
And the ending, well, I don't think it's the very ending, but one of the final shots there at the end of like the dead body on the floor and everyone standing around.
Yeah.
It almost kind of like breaks the drama for me, but like Morn is the barfly. He's like one of the people standing there. But
the only thing that's slightly weird to me about that is that for dramatic purposes, they clearly needed him to die fast, live just long enough, I think, to kind of dramatically look into Kira's eyes for a few minutes, and she says one or two things to him, I think, right?
Yeah.
That's when she talks to him.
They share
she kind of comforts him. But, like, nobody is like, let's do some CPR, let's get him to sickbay and try and revive him. Odo is, like, looking somber, and everybody kind of just looks somber.
We don't know Cardassian anatomy. Like, that might have been, like, their death spot if you stab them there.
It's very clear the scene was meant to, that was the dramatic finale of the episode, and showing them, like, rushing him off on a gurney to try and revive him would serve no dramatic purpose. Absolutely understand why they did it. In some back corner of my mind, I was like, it was just slightly funny. They're like, well, it was his destiny. It's just kind of funny.
And the tragedy there being that, like, he wanted to go do, like, this cool thing, and then he doesn't get to do it.
He would have been able to do more for Bajor, like I said, than any other Cardassian to date, and then a Bajoran just pops him. Yeah.
And I love, I don't know, like, I just love the idea of, like, Kira is the person who as radical as she had to be a resistance fighter for all those years, she can still look past that. She can still, like, forgive a Cardassian. Mm-hmm. And again, like, this is an episode where the bad guy is a Bajoran. Yeah. The only quote-unquote bad guy in that episode is the guy who...
Do you ever worry about, like, whether they were, that philosophically the show was more worried about insurgents than they were oppressors?
No, but I think the show is just trying to take a very nuanced look at it. Mm-hmm. And they've said, like, I believe, like, Nana Visitors has said, like, like, post 9/11, we never would have been able to make that show because the Bajorans were too similar to the modern day idea of a terrorist. Mm-hmm. But I think that they were just trying to have, like, a very, like, nuanced look at it, and they get a lot of mileage out of having, like,
sometimes removing things, like, it has clear cut real world analogs, the Bajoran Cardassian situation, but it's also removed enough that I don't feel like it's beholden to it, and being able to step out of, like, political specifics allows them, I think, to do those more nuanced stories.
And it's enough
because we stop trying to think, like, well, are they trying to tell me how to feel about Israel and Palestine? Right. And you start thinking about them as characters.
Yeah.
As like people and ideas and stuff like that.
That's another thing I love about the show, is that it's so well fleshed out that it is its own thing. I mean, there's elements of Nazi Germany and Jewish Europeans in occupied territory. There's elements of that in there. There's elements of Palestinians and Israelis. Mm-hmm. There's elements of North American natives and then European and colonialists.
No doubt, like the Mujahideen. So yeah,
but at the end of the day, it is its own thing that just shares all these inspirations from real world type stuff. Mm-hmm. But speaking of, like, the Bajorans, sometimes getting to be the bad guys. The next episode, the last thing we're going to talk about, in the Hands of the Prophets, has a Bajoran bad guy.
Yep.
And this introduces
a zealot.
Yeah, we get Vedic Wynn,
who's a sharper zealot than we give her credit for at the beginning of the episode. She seems like a kind of, not cartoonish villain, but she's like an annoying lady at the school board calling for them to teach creationism. Well, like with many, but she has another agenda that we do not know yet.
Like with many Deep Space Nine characters, she does feel real. She
Absolutely,
feels like an organic character.
Oh yeah, I wanted to slap her.
Well, you're gonna get to want to slap her a lot because she's going to be around for a while. She's a thorn in the side.
That's great. I love it.
And I feel like I keep saying, like, oh, this is one of my favorite characters in Star Trek. This is one of my favorite characters in Star Trek. But she is one of my favorite Star Trek villains.
Oh, interesting. I kind of thought it would be a one-off, so it's another thing I'll look forward to.
Yeah, but this is the story about
It begins with Keiko teaching about her students about the wormhole.
Yeah, or the Celestial Temple, if you're Bajoran in the Prophet's religion.
She's teaching the sort of raw science of the wormhole and its stability and why it's unique. And this Bajoran religious leader, what do they call them?
Vedics.
Yeah,
it's like an archbishop.
Right.
Whereas like the Kai is like the Pope, and then like the Vedic is like, they have like the Council of Vedics.
Oh, by the way, does that one Kai Opaka, does she ever recur? She stayed on that war-torn planet to fix things?
We're done with her.
Okay, that's kind of too bad because she seemed to make a pretty courageous choice. I was curious about what happened to her as well.
Well, she was like the good Pope.
Yeah. And then succession wars ensue.
Yeah, like a good Pope isn't as dramatic. So now they have like the House of Cards type of politics where they're trying to get like the new Kai. And we also meet Vedic Burrell, who...
Yeah. Oh, well, just to track back for just a second, this one Vedic, what's her name?
Wynn.
Vedic, how do you spell it?
Winn.
Winn. Vedic Wynn, she shows up in Keiko's class, and she does start to kind of question her, not kind of in that horrible but kind of nice, like, oh, I just want what's best for the kids way about how she's teaching it, noting she's really leaving out the Bajoran view of the wormhole.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a thing. There's protests.
And I know I was just kind of jumping on you for comparing things to real world events, but I feel like this just really demands that you compare this to the real life evolution in classroom type debates, or the comparison that they use in the show is Galileo and his persecution.
Right. I was fascinated to see that this is an interestingly kind of a harsh take on religion in some ways. Jake almost immediately dismisses it, and he's like, well, that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Those guys, the prophets are just aliens. You met them, Dad, right? And he's like, it's not mumbo jumbo, Jake. He's like, it means something to them. But he doesn't say, like, this is true. He says this is what got him through the war, right?
Yeah, but he says it's not that easy. Just like it wasn't that easy. Yeah, it was.
But it was interesting that, like, to me, that his perspective is a somewhat critical one of religion because he's only acknowledging that it served a practical purpose, not that it's true. Now, I know that he is kind of more broad-minded than that, but it is somewhat how it came off. Which I liked.
Well, Star Trek does have a history of being critical of religion.
Right.
And I know that bothers some people, but I mean, that's the harsh reality is Star Trek often takes an anti-theist stance.
At the same time, there's lots of spiritual characters in it, and DS9 obviously courts some positive spiritual stuff too, I assume, as things go along.
But that's different because their gods are actually real.
Right.
they're confirmed to have existed. Like they have conversations with people. They actually do things. So it's not as much faith versus science as it is.
Do the Bajorans feel that? But do they have like things where like do they believe that the prophets created their world and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, like it's hinted at that when Keiko says, like, if we have problems with this, we're also going to have problems with cosmology and evolution and all things that are traditionally are places where faith and science have conflicted in real life.
Right. Yeah, I was just trying to think, well, the Bajoran spirituality is going to be a bigger topic for another time, but yeah, they're definitely, there are also positive portrayals in Star Trek, and, some of, I might agree with some, disagree with others, but you can't be realistic and not show, I think, some positive and earnest portrayals of religion. And this episode, I guess, has both. There is a sincere Vedic as well, and a liberal-minded one, I guess I would say.
Vedic Burrell.
Yes.
Who he's... Yeah, we know right off the bat that he's, like, a more open-minded, less traditional type. Like, he doesn't want to, like, tug on Sisko's ear, so we're like, oh, so he's not, like, all those other weirdos.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating, kind of, when he tells Sisko that... Because, I mean, like, Sisko goes to this guy, like, to get help from him. Like, can you help get this other Vedic off my back? And he says, there's not a lot I can do now. I might become Kai, though. Yeah, I can be a better friend to you then.
Yeah.
Which, to me, is frustrating because... I'm just bringing too much real world stuff.
I was going to say, part of it is it does feel real, which makes it kind of harsh. I kind of loved at the very end of that conversation, he tells him, because it ends poorly for Sisko, he doesn't get what he wants, and the Vedic says, he's like, feel free to stay and tour the gardens, because they're in this sort of beautiful garden area of Bajor. Yeah. And the captain, and Sisko looks around and he kind of does this, like, what fucking why? Like, what, like, it's clear that token offer to enjoy the scenery means nothing to him.
And it's so Deep Space Nine though. Like there's so much nuance to everything. It's like, well, this guy is obviously likable, but why isn't he helping Sisko?
Right.
Like it's not the same type of thing we typically were getting in Star Trek up until this point, where normally like, you introduce like a nice guy like that, he's gonna like help your character along.
Right.
But no, like Deep Space Nine is like, it's the more real, it's the more organic.
This guy's like, come back to me when I get elected.
And we also have, besides just like all like the religious stuff in this episode, it is a super well structured episode. We have a murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
We have and I love the character Neela, the Bajoran mechanic that works with O'Brien.
Right.
So Dave, let me ask you.
Somewhat obviously, was it going to be in there to play some role?
Okay, so was it obvious to you that she was the killer?
Yes.
But what did you think about
although I expected that, I figured there could be a twist or two in there. It was clear that this character was not randomly introduced as somebody that O'Brien really relied upon and had been real helpful to him lately. It was for sure going to play a role. It was a new character. I wasn't too bothered by it because... it was not the heart of the episode. I think I might have liked a little bit more depth to the mystery of it all, but I cared more about the moral issues and the politicking behind the scenes was more interesting to me than the mystery.
There's a lot going on in there. I actually think it handled the mystery stuff pretty competently.
Yeah.
If that had been like the core of the episode was the murder mystery, then it wouldn't have been satisfactory. But that was just like another shade.
By the way, I felt stronger about Keiko and more defensive for her than I had in any other episodes because she was like the ultimate school teacher there
were you
who
worried
would not step down.
When the bomb went off, were you like, oh no, did Keiko blow up?
I kind of did wonder because I wasn't sure about her future on the show. Like, I don't know enough to know whether she was a recurring
She's an expendable character.
Yeah. I was not 100% sure.
But the ending of the episode, it turns into kind of like a political thriller where you have an assassination attempt.
Right.
And it does get kind of cheesy. Yeah. The cliche of someone diving in slow motion to stop a political assassination.
Right.
Which is just, it's so ingrained in our public consciousness in a country where we've had presidents get shot and we've had like attempted assassinations on presidents like multiple times. Like
it's I'm trying to think. The shot misses. How does she get taken down?
Sisko tackles her.
He just tackles her, and then
it's like she misses, and then he tackles her.
Right, and he just like pins her right away.
Yeah. And she's like, "Oh, the prophet's called, and I listened." But what the
real takeaway though is what they figure out, but cannot act upon.
Yeah, and the audience actually sees Neela goes to Vedic Win.
Right,
and it confirms to the audience that, holy shit, this Vedic is trying to assassinate her political opponent.
Right. I don't know if we said, but the other Vedic, the whole reason he came onto the station, or was he finally there to kind of bring some order to it?
Yeah, like they had asked him like come to the station and try to help, settle things down.
And that had always been their goal. The whole Teach Bajoran creationism was all to create enough of a furor, enough of a protest that he would be drawn to it and they could assassinate him.
Yeah, so this We had that nice Kai Opaka that we all like.
Mm-hmm.
She died, and now we have this Vedic Burrell, he's pretty cool. And then this Vedic Win is terrible, and she is trying to assassinate her political opponent.
Yep. They have nothing they can essentially charge her with at the end. So she gets off scot-free.
she's going to be a thorn in our sides for a while.
Cool. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to it because she seems like somebody who knows what she's doing. She seems like an effective opponent.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, like, Season 2 is 26 episodes. Not a whole lot of that is spent on the politics of the Bajoran religion and electing the new Kai, but that is something that they do follow up on in Season 2, and we see this go somewhere.
Okay.
So...
No, I'm down.
So I think that's it for Season 1. Any big disappointments? I feel like we were heaping a lot of praise, but is there anything that just really rubbed you the wrong way?
So, honestly, the denouements thing is actually the single biggest thing. Bashir being a little bit of a, kind of annoying sexist, and them kind of, I think they clearly thought he was kind of entertainingly kind of annoying, which is a little bit of a Next Generation thing. Barclay was that way sometimes. Data was portrayed as that way sometimes from, the perspective of, like, Riker or Geordi sometimes. Like, Data, come on. That kind of... that's a little bit of a trope for them, and... But I did not have any major complaints. It was the only issues I had was sometimes episodes didn't cohere quite as much as I might have liked them to. But I don't think there's anything, like, I have no major problems with any of their directions. I like kind of everything that they're doing. I felt like Dax needed a little bit more dramatic stuff to work with. She sometimes seemed smart and cool and level-headed, but I didn't feel like I was getting a lot of dramatic weight from her.
Well, in Season 2, you get to see her go on a Klingon murder crusade, so...
is that the one with with that one?
No, the episode you saw, Blood Oath.
That's Season 2?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, that is a great one to get things going then.
So you've made it through the worst season of Deep Space Nine.
And enjoyed it.
So do you feel like continuing to watch and going into Season 2 now?
I actually started to because I wanted to. I was like, I need to see what happens next. But then I stopped myself because I didn't want to start blurring some of that stuff that happens, and with my notoriously bad memory, thinking that things that happen in Episode 2 happen in Season 1. One of the things, very small point I want to mention, is another favorable point. As far as the character-based stuff, I like that Odo and Kira have a friendship beyond the core crew friendship. A friendship that's older, and I don't know if they ever do anything much with it, but a few times it kind of comes up that they had a past working relationship and kind of know each other. It reminded me a little bit of on Firefly, the way Mal and Zoe connect.
Oh yeah, that's so perfect. This is so exciting for me to like hear you like talk about all this stuff and ask like I don't know where they're gonna go with that. So, like we actually see
because I could see it as being something that kind of gets forgotten.
No, they don't forget about that, and they actually eventually flash back to like their first meeting.
Oh, awesome!
And, like during the Cardassian occupation.
Cool.
Yeah, and Odo is interesting because he was chief of security, when Gul Dukat was on Terok Nur, like running this, like he worked for the Cardassians,
right? And
we even see Odo like a couple of times, like it sure was easier to get results back then when I could just like arrest people for anything.
Right, he clearly is a guy who could occasionally enjoy the trains ran on time approach.
But Odo does have a devotion to justice, and as much as like Klingons care about honor. Vulcans care about logic. Ferengi care about profit. Odo cares about justice. And he even tells Cisco in Season 1, he says, laws change with whatever government is in power, but justice is justice. And that's kind of dangerous to have like that monolithic
It's a little Rorschach.
But Rorschach is a very entertaining character.
Absolutely.
So, and I love having Odo in the mix.
Anyway, that's all I got.
Cool. Well, maybe in a couple of months or whenever, we'll revisit DS9 and talk about Season 2.
Sounds good.
And that's going to be it for our Season 1 conversation. But we will be back soon for our 47th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast. And we're also coming up on our 2-year anniversary.
Holy shit.
So we'll be celebrating that next time. And until then, live long and prosper, y'all. Thank all of you so much for checking out this installment of Tex-Trek. I hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure to like our YouTube videos and subscribe to our channel. Audio-only version of episodes are available at our website, www.tex-trek.com. Please check out our site, especially if you just want an audio-only podcast. We have that available for you. Y'all can also keep up with us online. You can follow us on Twitter at Tex-Trek, or you can check us out on Facebook at www.facebook.com/tex-trek. Please, by all means, let us know what you think by dropping a comment anywhere you see fit. We definitely want to hear your feedback. Let us know what you liked and what you would like to see more of, what you would like to see differently going forward. If you want to email me directly, go ahead. I can be reached at fathereeactual@tex-trek.com. Thank all y'all again. Take care.